I'm Ibby Syed.
I'm Sean Collins.
And this is Numbers and Narratives. Amit, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself? Give us what you're up to now, and give us where you were before and a little bit of your working history.
Sure. So right now I'm about 7 months into a coaching practice that I've put my whole heart and soul into, and it is 100% of what I do. It really comes from having realized in a lot of the business context that I was in that the right answer isn't actually the hard part. The hard part is actually getting everyone to have the faith, confidence, motivation to go after that right answer at the expense of perhaps personal needs or personal requirements by understanding like a common purpose and mission. And having the right conversations to say, hey, listen, we don't actually have a common set of values or purpose here. So let's make sure we align that first before we get into what is the right database answer. So that's where I am now, which is very different, but driven by where I've come from. I started out in life as a materials science engineer, which for those of us who think that engineers are just, people on keyboards, there is a whole other world of engineers that mix chemicals and do things. I was one of those. I then promptly dropped that and went into investment banking like every other greedy engineer back in 2008. Did that for a couple of years. Knew I needed to go back to business school because I'd learned nothing about business in a sort of academic context. So, was fortunate enough to go to University of Chicago Booth. Went there and then kind of went to finishing school, which is kind of standard path. It was at McKinsey for 3 or 4 years. And there was like my first taste of e-com, but in a very backwater part of it, basically all the insurance companies trying to catch up to Geico and Progressive, where Geico and Progressive, obviously stepped out of the agent model and really crushed to direct to consumer. Everybody else tried to play catch up. We were, as McKinsey, coming in to help everybody try to figure that out. So that was my first taste of e-com in a very, very kind of staid and sort of stoic industry, so to speak. But that led me to have a fascination with it. And then that led to a series of stops along the way. I won't mention all of them, but I was at Hulu for a little bit. I was at a small company called TrueCar, which was like super interesting partnership marketplace. From there, stepped into some bigger brands, although I guess Hulu is a pretty big brand. I ended up going to Wayfair to do some supply chain work, which was really interesting because at that point in my career, I didn't think anyone would give me a chance with something completely new from a functional perspective. But Wayfair was just eager to hire sharp folks. At least they thought I was sharp. Whether I'm not or not, you guys can decide at the end of the podcast, all of you out there listening. And I did some supply chain work there for a while. That's actually where I also got transitioned into post-order communications, customer cycle, and CRM type work as well. They just put a kind of a motley crew of a few of us together and said, we know our post-purchase CRM journey is a mess. Please sort it out. And there was a lot of sort of data components to that we could talk about if you guys want to. We sorted it out, not fully, but we did get some big problems dealt with. And then I kind of saw the writing on the wall that like the institutional sort of cross-functional drive was starting to like go to other places, which made sense because there were other priorities. The pandemic was just about to start at the time. And so I looked for other opportunities. That kind of led through a couple of roundabouts to HelloFresh, where I was for a year and a half. I started in a role very much focused on U.S. market retention. So, it was a cross-functional role aimed at actually looking at CLV and all components of CLV, both the dollar per box component and the number of boxes per component, the number of boxes component, and really just looking at what are we doing that's impacting this both positively and negatively? Where are there unintentional consequences of actions we're taking in various other parts of the business? And just kind of being a lighthouse for that. That kind of grew into, there was kind of a not sure how much of the HelloFresh story is known to the listener base, but HelloFresh is an international brand with operations in, I don't want to misspeak, but certainly almost all major European markets and the US as well, and Australia, New Zealand, and a few others, UK too. So, there was a realization that, okay, we've built individual sort of CRM flows in all of these different countries. We haven't really taken a holistic view to what the actual lifecycle marketing communications should look like. Let's bring that all under one house and take the best of all the different, opportunities that are CRM flows that exist in each local market. So then I stepped into that role for about 6 months as kind of the head of global active CRM communications, basically all of our CRM comms to active customers. It was a pretty solid turnaround. Got kind of the setup going, and while we were setting up for that turnaround, I was also kind of getting the things lined up to start this coaching practice. And I kind of put that in hopefully a good spot and handed it off, and then stepped full on into doing life coaching and mindset coaching. So that's where we are.
That's super cool. When you say you got to HelloFresh and like got everything like set up from like a CRM perspective, what does that actually entail? Like when you start a CRM practice from the ground up, what does that actually look like?
It's a good question, and I should be super specific as well versus kind of leaving it open to interpretation. There was an extremely sharp crew of folks on the CRM execution side of things. So if you're talking about kind of the tooling and the Salesforce side of it and all implementation and all of that, that was all kind of well in hand. But because the story of HelloFresh was one of, unparalleled growth, what to speak of during the pandemic when things had really been, there was heavy emphasis on the prospecting flows and on the sort of like, first 2 week flows. But if you actually talk about the onboarding communications, if you actually talk about the week to week communications about your box, if you actually talk about, hey, all the loyalty challenges and like discount and promotional communications, we were just, referral, like please refer us to other people. Like every silo of type of business objective that we had was just shoving in communications into the active base independently. There was an understanding and awareness that not only is that not coordinated across all of our business objectives from our active base to say like what actually makes sense from the customer's point of view, right? Aligned to our business objectives versus like isolated business objectives saying, oh, look, there's a free email base here. Let's just go push this in email because it's free and it doesn't cost us anything, right? How do we actually organize that was a big question that was like recognized, like we got to answer this question and we have to have a standard for this globally. Of course, localization will be necessary, right? But what had happened was because it was kind of stamped out market by market, right? You had a wide, diverse like set of outcomes that did not have sort of a systematic, okay, let's bring this together and put a centralized viewpoint out there on what we believe is right. And then we need to customize off of this for specific market nuance, right? So that was like getting that set up was putting the framework together for, hey, listen, what do we believe in here? What is the relative value of these different business objectives that we have at different points in the customer's life? Let's build a point of view on this that we actually can all buy into. And let's build the processes as well that we deal with all of the exception management stuff. So, hey, someone believes that they want to go, like that would happen often. And for the benefit of the business, like we just needed a process to handle it. Hey, listen, like we have struck a deal at a specific local market with a canned, sort of non-alc brand or whatever it is. We struck a deal with another product partner that wants to put product in our boxes. And we promised that we would send a bunch of emails to our active base to push their product as kind of the quid pro quo marketing. Okay. How do we not just like say yes to that, but also not just say no to that? How do we actually bring that in a systematic way where we can evaluate like what part of the life cycle and with what volume does that fit in? Governance, things like that. That was kind of the first 6 months there.
That's fascinating. So I do think that a lot of brands and a lot of teams out there feel some sort of level of pressure to get a certain volume of messages out, almost like the act of sending an email or a text is success in and of itself, as opposed to the value it provides to a customer or member or user, whatever whatever your nomenclature is, or the business impact it drives. People get into this rhythm of like, well, I have to have my weekly newsletter, or I have to send 3 messages this week. What was it like? I guess are you saying that that's ridiculous or not necessary? B, if I'm understanding you correctly, kind of how did you break that habit and mindset and transition to one where you are focused on finding the right group in the right time?
Yeah, so 2 questions there, both valuable. I'll take them in order. I'm humble enough to not know what's ridiculous or not ridiculous in individual situations, but at the same time, I'm also going to take the stand that like it's not ridiculous that you're saying that. It's ridiculous that you don't have a second question, which is this actually valuable to my consumers? That is objectively the problem, right? It may be that you need to send 3 emails a week. Like that may actually be the answer, right? But like you're anchoring on an activity. You're not anchoring on what is actually useful for my consumer right now, right? And that mindset just creates problems because you start then treating email as, and not just email, SMS, whatever it is, You start treating all of these owned channels as costless channels, and they carry cost. Like every interaction, I mean, I'm going to get on a small soapbox. Every interaction with a customer is both opportunity and risk. It's opportunity to serve them, and it's risk to annoy them. That is every interaction with a customer that you have. You can delight them or annoy them. That's the chance you take every time you choose to put yourself in interaction with the customer. And so there's a mindset that needs to be brought into this of like, okay, what, and analytics plays a role as well, but there's also first a top-down view of, in my view anyway, a top-down view of what makes sense for our customer. Let's actually understand our product, understand the customer mix, understand the need sets of our customers and the usage patterns of our customers. How are they using our offering, right? And then from there, map it out and say, okay, this is like, if I had to design this, I would have these following touch points, right? And then on top of that, then you can go into your own mindset and say, okay, yeah, but if I was a customer, I would never want to be emailed by anybody ever. So I would want to have 0 touch points. If that's the truth, say that. That doesn't mean you don't send any emails. But if that's actually the truth in your mind, if you say, if I'm in the mind of a customer, I don't want to hear anything about this apart from when I'm trying to purchase it, like put that on the page and then say, okay, but we also have to encourage our customers to engage with our product. So while they may not of their own accord have an awareness that this is useful to them, we have to now decide where can we actually be useful to them with our messaging. And then be aware that there's a bar there that I have to clear. Like the first thing they're thinking when they see my email in that moment is like, I don't need this email. So, okay, what do we do with the subject line? What do we do with the content? What is the actual purpose of this, that we can actually clear that bar and say, no, this is actually a useful message for you, right? So, I mean, I think there's sort of a reticence and there's sort of this like putting yourself, not as the individual hands on keyboard, but putting the function of marketing in the center of the whole picture and saying like, what we do is really important. And it's like, what we do is really important because we help our customers understand our product, right? I mean, there, you hear all of, I'm not going to misquote Bezos or anything, but like you hear all of this talk about like the product should market itself, right? To an extent, that's true. But then the role of marketing is to actually communicate that product to the customers in a way that helps them see what is to be seen that they're not seeing and actually delights them when they need the actual message. So like a bit of a rant, but the mindset really matters. And then as far as how we did it at HelloFresh, the first thing that we had to do was we had to actually establish that the house was on fire in a way, and this is where the data comes into it. We had to establish that in a way that was incontrovertible for everyone, right? And so what we did was we actually took an exercise up to say, okay, let's not put let's look at clean data. And to get to clean data, you generally need to go to straightforward data. The more nuanced you get, the more assumptions, caveats, all the other stuff you have to apply. So we said, let's just literally line it up. Frequency of communication to customer, click-through rate. Obviously, open rates and things are not very hard to find and all that. And when we pick one important thing, we pick one channel. We said, let's not try to overcomplicate this with boiling the ocean and doing all the channels at one time. Let's pick one channel. Let's understand how the channel has been performing at a very basic level, like very almost like kindergarten level. We looked at it over a course of 12 quarters, and frequency of messaging on a per active customer basis had gone up by, like, not overall volume, of course, because like, again, your acquired customers, all of that, like frequency per customer of messaging had gone up by about 5x, and CTR had become sort of 20% of what it was. Now everybody inevitably has a point of view on why that's the case, right? And that's a nuanced discussion. But the first point was to say, look, guys, you could call it correlation, causation. You can write a PhD thesis on factors of regression and all of this stuff. The bottom line is we are shouting at our customers 5 times more than we used to. And customers are ignoring us far more now than they were before. Doesn't take a rocket scientist to say that there's something there. We need to figure this out, right? And sure enough, there was a lot of discussion, and as there should be, there was a lot of discussion about correlation versus causation. Hey, there's more competition, more noise in the email inbox. All of that discussion happened. And again, that discussion should have happened, right? But at the same time, there was also now there was just this clear picture that okay, we have to at least be able to justify why we're sending 5x the communications we used to send. let's at least have, like, if we're going to stand on that, but we need to be able to stand on that with a rationale and not just it organically happened. And, the answer was somewhere in between, like it always is. I took a very firm position up front deliberately just to shake the tree, right? That like, hey.
And what was that? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, the tree shake. The tree shake was like, there's actually no rationale for this to be 5x. This has happened because of organizational setup, right? We have siloed business objectives. We have a team that's focused on getting referral volume. We have a team that's focused on getting extra cross-sell and upsell inside of each individual box. We have a team that's focused on, and multiply that by however many countries or whatever. We have this very focused business objectives for which in an individual business objective, if you do an email A/B test or a holdout test on an isolated business objective and an isolated communication, it will always be better to send the email than not send the email. That is a law of physics.
So you're saying, so you're saying like you guys had grown as a company. Basically, a lot of it was you'd grown as a company. There had been a lot of things that had come up as hey, we want to try this, or we want to upsell more, we want to prevent churn more, or we want to do this, and it just ended up with everything resulting in just a lot more emails and
importantly,
all important, obviously, but that was kind of your thought.
Yeah, and I'm just, because y'all are data guys, I'll just underscore the point again. Maybe a simple and obvious point for folks who are steeped in CRM, but for those that may not be as much, like if you run an email test where you say my test is don't send the email to part of the population, send the email to part of the population, look at 3 to 5 day results on whatever you want to look at, gross merchandise value. The one where you send the email will always be at, like, because you set the floor as 0. So like
in a vacuum, will always make more money than not sending the email.
More sense. And
You're
so,
comparing
like,
yourself against the natural behavior, so it's always going to be a nudge will always work.
A nudge will always work, right? And then, especially if you're looking at the nudge in a narrow context of what, like, now make that very kind of perhaps obvious statement a little less obvious by saying now you're not even looking at all the economics. So you say, okay, I'm going to be focused on referrals. Let's say, like, my goal is to get referral volume. All right, I got 2 extra referrals, but I pissed off a whole bunch of other customers. Well, that doesn't matter to me from a referral standpoint. They were going to refer anyway. It matters for a bunch of other things, right?
I mean, actually, even if you run a test, go for it, Sean.
Well, I was just saying, because the downside is not only like, yeah, you might optimize for one near-term metric in this 1 to 3 day span, but the percent lift is always going to be bigger because you're going to have a huge population that starts to unsubscribe or silence your messages.
Yeah.
And so now they've shut down forever. And so you put a near-term metric over every single business metric that you're talking about for the rest of the span of the customer's lifetime. So either they unsubscribe or they straight up unsubscribe or stop buying from your product.
Or tune out or whatever it is, right? So a couple of hygiene things here, because again, I based on sort of like not knowing your listener base well, cut me off if this is all stuff they would know. But like a couple of hygiene things that I was sort of surprised at a couple stops in my journey to realize. I mean, first I had to be taught this. I was taught this by an excellent CRM person that mentored me back in the day as my boss. But then as I just assumed everybody would be doing this. And then as I made stops along the way, I realized like, wow, this is not something that everyone is doing. Like you absolutely have to put a price on an unsubscribe in all of your email testing. Super basic hygiene point. Like not even talking about these big picture things about aligning silos and all of that stuff, but like just super basic hygiene point. If you're running an email test, you should look at the uplift in unsubscribes versus a holdout or between two email types or whatever you're doing, and you should ascribe a value to it. Now we can go down a whole thing if you're interested or if listeners are interested on like how to do that thoughtfully.
Actually, I don't know how this works. This is actually a super good, interesting point. Like how would you? Assuming that you're running a simple email test, what is the value of an unsubscribed? I actually don't like. Yeah, so I'd love to know.
Let's go there. Before we go there, I'm going to just put a big red highlighter underline on like put something there for it, and then now we'll talk about how to do it smartly. But because it's hard to do, well, it's not a question of hard because there's nuance and open for discussion areas on how to do it smartly. People just don't do it. It's just like, oh, whatever. Right? Slap like even at a most basic level, slap like, okay, take your AOV of a sale and multiply it by like whatever your CTR is on an email. Put some really sort of, kindergarten logic if you need to get to a number And then again, you don't have to live and die by what the test result says. That's another thing, right? It's like, oh, when I add, just see it both ways. See what your test looks like without that loaded in as a load factor, and see what it is with the number loaded in as a load factor, right? And so anyway, I'm going to go into like the how to do it in various potentially intelligent ways now. But I just like, what often happens is because there's so much PhD thesising that you can do about the perfect way to do this, it just kind of dies. And in smaller companies, it dies in a death of, I don't have time for this. In larger companies, it dies in a death of, well, let's actually send 8 data science teams to go fight over how to do it perfectly. And then like, it never happens. Right.
Yeah. I mean, is the thing is like some metrics need to be exact, right? Like if you need to know for tax purposes, a business needs to know, hey, how much money did I make last month? Right. But for something like this, as long as you establish a baseline, what you're trying to do at the end of the day is figure out how much each email moves from that baseline, right? It could be like, It could be measured in anything. It doesn't have to be measured in dollars. It can be measured in number of customers. It could be measured in whatever. I think what you said is attach a dollar value to it because that makes the most sense. That you can show how it affects some sort of bottom line. But at the end of the day, like what you're trying to do is you're trying to show deference from the mean, deference from the average, deference from the baseline, rather than, hey, this is the exact book value that we're losing.
Yeah.
And so many people miss the forest for the trees. Yeah. So many people just miss the forest for the trees on that one, where they're like, oh, like we need to know exactly what this dollar amount is. Ergo, we're going to spend like 6 months deciding it. And in the span, you've lost like 80,000 customers.
Yeah. Cause you just, or you've lost them off your list. Even if you've not lost the customer, you've lost them off your list. Right. So, I mean, look, I'm not the sort of the point god, Chris Paul of CRM, but like, if you were to talk about a basic way to do this, right, what you have to do is you have to take a percentage of your list and like never talk to them. So you put a continuous holdout group. I mean, again, I'm not a PhD data science guy, so I might be misusing terms here, but the point is like you basically take a longitudinal holdout or a contiguous holdout group, whatever it is, and you just never talk to them. And you have to, importantly, out of every cohort of acquired customers, you need to set aside a little small piece. Another word that I've heard used is like universal holdout group, right? Whatever you want to call it, right? You put them aside and you just don't talk to them and you see what their business performance looks like, right? And then you say, okay, that business performance is what is coming to me if I never talk to them again, right? Now, if I'm talking to them, now look at the portfolio of customers. Like now don't look at it on email, look at the remaining portfolio of customers acquired in the same cohort, right? And then say, okay, let's look at where their business performance is. So all the other factors, mixed experiences, somebody got upset, different kind of target market, all that. Like you could sit there. Now you can start to see why this becomes a go as deep as you want to go exercise. Because if I just say what I just said, people could say, well, did I have enough of like the right sort of distribution of customer segments in the universal holdout? Well, did I have we can go as deep as we want to go. But the bottom line is like, if you do that, you at least have a version of a ceiling on it. Take a haircut. Say, okay, if that's the delta between the universal holdout and kind of the remainder of cohort performance, like I'm going to take half of that and call that the value of an unsubscribe or the impact of an unsubscribe, right? There's the as you've pointed out, we won't beat the point up. The accuracy is like, the precision is less important than the general accuracy, right? That like, hey, listen, we're valuing this and we're putting a number on it. And again, it's like a basic hygiene point, but like it's a point that gets lost a lot of the time, I think. And it gets lost a lot of the time because it starts to give confusing results, right? Let me give another, since we're down the rabbit hole and you guys pull me back if you need to, let me give another like place where this starts to get problematic. At company, will remain nameless, I was like, wait, we're not doing the hygiene thing. Let's do the hygiene thing. Let's get a universal holdout group established. Did that. It said that there was like zero problem with an unsubscribe. Like there was no actual like impact of an unsubscribe. And I said, okay, common sense hat on, doesn't add up. Let's start looking around. What's going on, right? First of all, I was already in the tank because now everyone's like, unsubscribes don't matter. And I'm like, oh my God, no, if that's what your data is telling you, there's something else that we need to figure out.
Like, what that probably means is that all your emails are absolutely worthless.
I mean, like, so then I got on a soapbox and then I got in some fisticuffs with some people around like, exactly your point, Sean, of like, it's one or the other. What are we talking about here? As it turned out, it was in a sense neither. The unsubscribe page itself was so buried that it took like 12 clicks to get to an unsubscribe.
Does that mean that nobody unsubscribed?
It was a very small number.
Okay.
So like then when you look at that very small number of people, or if you do the holdout versus that or whatever, it just and that was the other thing. Like when people would the other thing, actually I take it back because I'm kind of mixing stories here, because the way they elected to do it when I said let's please do the hygiene thing was slightly different than the universal holdout group I described. They were not comfortable doing a universal holdout group, and I understood why. It was like, oh, we don't want to take 10% of our list at opportunity cost, whatever. Fine. They just started looking at post unsubscribe behavior, which is another fine way to do it. I mean, you just need to come up with something that's sensible, right? So they started saying, okay, let's look at the customers who unsubscribe, and then let's look at their behavior, like pre versus post, right? Like what was their, what was their business with us like in the 6 months prior to the unsubscribe? What is their business like in the 6 months post the unsubscribe, right? So that was how they elected to do it. And then there were two things. One, the volume of unsubscribes was so small now that like it wasn't really giving you a read on anything because the unsubscribe was so buried. The other challenge was that like the way the unsubscribing was set up, which again, I'm not a legal expert, but I had questions about that. I was like, isn't this like, don't we have to be a little bit more careful here? And then they figured out how to manage all that. But like you were silo unsubscribing. So you were unsubscribing from like a type
from
of
a
communication.
list, not from your entire marketing setup.
Yeah. So it wasn't that like, okay, now no more. So the unsubscribes were set up in such a way that there was no, which like fair play. I mean, if you do that, then like, yes, you will never have anybody unsubscribe from your list. Also, really bad experience for people who think they've unsubscribed from all your communications, but have like forgotten to check the 6 extra boxes underneath that like get them out of the other 6 types of messages. So there were a whole bunch of things there. We sorted through it, some of it anyway. But again, like the point is pick a path and understand the impact. And the other thing I would say is like, listen, the unsubscribe is like the last, and again, common sense thing in the sense, like, I don't know what people's perceptions of these things are, but like the unsubscribe is the end. It's the equivalent of cancellation, right? Like, so, I would always advocate for, and had varying degrees of success depending on where I was, in like actually saying, okay, whatever that universal holdout group versus marketed list number is, when we're doing our email testing, we need to put a multiple on that number, not a haircut, for the impact of an unsubscribe. Because the unsubscribe, like, in order to account for the fact that the unsubscribe volume is actually only capturing a portion of the tune out effect that's happening. So if there's an unsubscribe lift of whatever it is, there's a whole extra set of folks who this was also contributing to just their fatigue of email, right? And again, I got very reasonable pushback on that of like, hey, listen, like this is an arbitrary multiple, like you're confusing things, you're adding more noise than signal into the test reads and this and that. So it was a good discussion. I mean, but that's where I started just sort of shifting the whole thing back to like, guys, are our comms useful? That's really the question. We don't have to go 9 miles deep on unsubscribe logic if we can just feel like sleep at night saying that like, yes, our comms are serving our customers. If we believe in that.
That's really interesting. And what you're talking about is really the difference between, or part of what you touched on there is like the difference between like a technical unsubscribe where someone like truly unsubscribes your messages versus like a functional unsubscribe where someone just decides I'm never going to open this message again. And my inbox is full of emails that I'm just like, well, they're as good as dead to me, but I'm not going to go in and spend my time clicking in to unsubscribe and deal with this.
What to speak of the person that goes through the page but like doesn't press the actual final button or whatever, right?
Today I got the worst one. I unsubscribed from an email and they sent me a confirmation email saying I was unsubscribed and saying, would you like to resubscribe? This was surely an accident. It's like, no, you asshole. Like it was already hard enough to unsubscribe from your page because it was multi-layers deep. Please stop emailing me. You're missing the point. But anyways, okay. So if we're going to start from a place of how do we deliver more value for our customers or our members or our users or subscribers, whatever the business case entails, in sort of in a way to get away from what you were talking about with all these business units competing to get, their slot in the weekly content calendar, is the solution that you go to like 100% behaviorally triggered messages instead of kind of campaigns, or how do you kind of increase that value and relevance?
I mean, I'm what's the word? I'm a reasonable human. Obviously, that is impossible, but it is directionally like a good step, right? It is a good step to say, leave aside the technology and whether we can build a trigger, because that often is a gating factor. People are like, oh, well, we don't have that data in a way that we can stream into our Salesforce or whatever, right? But let's set that aside. In our minds, is this triggered off of something? I'm trying to think of a good example. You have a new extension, whatever it is, right? You have a product A, you go to product B, right? It's a launch, right? Everyone will but even if the user's perspective is, I don't need to hear about that, everyone can at least get themselves on board as a user with, oh, you're telling me about a new product. Got it, right? What counts as a new product, right? Like, so the bar that we started putting
is a feature announcement actually
is a feature announcement actually like a product announcement, right? Yeah. Like what actually
there's like so many things where it's like, hey, like anything from, hey, we've like launched a new, I don't know, we've completely rebranded our business, all the way to, hey, here's our change log for this app.
And or like e-commerce, hey, here's a new color of these pants.
Right. Like, so let's take the new color of the pants. I mean, that's a little tricky one to go in the direction I was going, but let me try. The new color of the pants, right? You had a point of view when you decided to make a new color of pants. You had a point of view on why that mattered, why you needed to go pin that. Find the portion of your active base that fits that point of view and tell them about it. Don't tell everybody about it.
So would that be the people that have bought the pants or bought the color or both?
It kind of depends. That's why I sort of said this is a little tricky, but it depends on what was your thesis. Like, and like that was a lot of, at the specific company I have in mind, that was a lot of what it was, and it was earlier in my tenure than later in my tenure, but it was a lot of actually stitching these things back together to say, okay, you guys want to talk to the whole base about something. Why did you do this thing? And not in a rhetorical way. Like, no, seriously, tell me, like, why did we build feature X, or why did we extend to product Y, or what was the theory around? And if it has mass market appeal, let's talk to everybody about it. Go for it, right?
Yeah, that's actually fair, because a lot of times it could just be because so many people asked for it, right? Where it's like, hey, like I've bought a shirt in color X and I've bought these pants. I want a pant in color X.
Rock on.
Like, go out to those people.
Or there's so many ways you can frame it, but like it could be, hey, people who have never bought this pair of pants, but they looked at it, and so maybe color was the issue, right? But I think what you're saying is have a reason, and if you can't justify beyond, I don't have a reason not to tell them about this, there's probably a better message for that user. And
well, and let's go to the ugly part of this, right? Let's go to the ugly part. If the reason is I need to show that this product and feature is getting adopted, so I need to tell as many people as I can so that it looks like in an artificial way, but like I need to show that this thing really matters, right? I have a metric, I have an OKR, I have a KI, I have a whatever the hell I have that I'm trying to hit. And so I'm back solving. Like even that conversation is enlightening. Like I've had a lot of conversations with folks where I've been like, I empathize, right? Tell me that openly and trust that I'll handle that not from a place of like non-empathy. Right? Okay, listen, you want to go to the full list because you want to see this thing take off. Got it. Couple things. One, in absolute terms, you will find everybody who is interested. You will also find a bunch of people who it didn't make sense for, who try it and are confused by it. Do you really want that? Like, there's a lot of reasons why it's not actually aligned. And then a lot of times it would be like, hey, listen, can you step in and have that conversation? I'm like, absolutely. Like, I'm not Mr. No over here. Who do I need to get in front of and like take the body blows from? And sometimes that would happen. Sometimes you'd have to go into a meeting and say, listen, guys, like ultimately I'm happy to disagree and commit if we all decide we want to go full list with this announcement, right? But let's have the conversation and understand that like we don't have a structured thesis for that. Or we have two different opinions on the structured thesis and we're going to go with one opinion over another. Fine, right? And it also depends on where you are. Like, again, because a lot of listers, a lot of what you said is like, hey, listen, medium-sized company. This is like not strictly speaking as big of an issue if your list is small, right? this is another point I want to make, because I've been kind of on the frequency soapbox here for a little bit now. So I also want to make sure that it's very thoughtfully articulated that like the frequency soapbox matters when your list starts to get to a certain size and your product, like the more your product market fit is tight with your user base, the less all of this matters. Everything. And I got to be humble to that, right? If you have really tight product market fit for what you're doing with your entire base, then they'll give you forgiveness, right? Like they're bought in a really deep way to what you're doing, right? But the reality is, as your list scales, by default, almost, your product market fit starts to get a little bit looser. That's the truth, right? Like you have every brand, company, product, whatever, there is the core, like this is the perfect thing for me set of humans. And then there starts to become like, this is kind of useful for me, and this is kind of useful for me, and this is kind of useful for me, and this is sort of not useful for me, but I'm going to try it because you're giving me a promotional price on it, and on and on and on it goes in concentric circles.
Your first 100 customers are like going to hopefully
diehard. They're going to open all your
diehard fans, and then every single customer the N+1 customer that you get after that is going to be a little bit less.
And hopefully you develop new product, right? Hopefully you develop new product so that you have the next 100 and like, you know, like, but that's another reason why you can't send every single thing to everyone, right? Because if you're developing a new product, then suddenly you're effectively running two businesses, and you have to figure out how to split that gigantic list into who cares about product X and who cares about product Y and who cares about product Z. That hygiene really does matter. So, I just wanted to kind of balance it out a bit, because I realized I was on one end of the soapbox for a while, to say that, like, yeah, look, at the end of the day, like what we're talking about is a situation where you're at a medium to medium high scale, right? We're not talking about a situation where you're at a small to small medium scale, because they're just get on with it, build the product, talk about the product, get people excited. Like they're all in anyway. Like all of this stuff is a bit over the top, right? Triggered communications, though, just to like answer the question asked, which I realized I kind of accidentally did a bit of a U-turn on. Like have a target. I don't know what the right number is. 100% is obviously like, I'm not naive. I didn't fall off the turnip truck. None of us did yesterday. But have a point of view on what share of your reach, what share of your volume and what share of your direct response driven off of that volume comes from triggered versus blast / badge / whatever, right? Have a point of view on what that mix should be. Don't just kind of let it happen organically, however it happens. Oh, we have a cart abandoned email, and then everything else we just slam the whole list with, and that's life. Like, take a stand on that.
I think that's really interesting, because I appreciate you mentioning the phrase direct response. I think one thing we all would say if a friend's company came to us for advice, we would all say, hey, one of the things you have to do is figure out your natural buying cycle, and based off of usage, how often can you or should you expect someone to be purchasing? And obviously you want to have messages tied around there, right? There's probably the lead in to as they're entering that new purchase phase. There's the ones right at when they're like, hey, this is what, the AI is telling me is the day that they're going to buy. And then there's the, hey, they missed it. How do I save this sale? In between those natural buying cycles, you would logically either be pushing for an upsell or a cross-sell, or staying silent. I often wonder if there's a smarter, better middle ground. Is there a world where there's like non-direct response messages, like brand messages? How do you think that kind of fits in once you identified the natural use and buying cycles?
Yeah. So, I said, because there absolutely is a middle ground in my sort of estimation. I'll share what I feel that looks like, and then I'll use an example. But to be clear, this is a consumer-based example, so I actually don't know much about the inner workings of how these decisions were aligned. It's just me as a consumer of a specific product. So the middle ground is, two things first, sidebar, and then back to middle ground. Sidebar is non-behavior is behavior. So there's sort of this thing of like trigger. Well, I don't have that. What can I trigger on? I've already done all the triggers. I have an abandoned cart email. I have a this, I have a that. Hey, somebody not visiting your site for 12 months or 3 months or 3 weeks is a behavior. So there's a little bit of that too, of like, hey, I can even if it feels like batch to me, I can treat it as a trigger to say, hey, listen, I am going to go talk with a megaphone to the people that haven't showed up in a month. but I'm going to talk to them in a specific way. And that, in my mind, in the nomenclature I'm using, is a triggered communication. Because you're setting a boundary on it, right?
The absence of an action or a behavior is an action.
Yeah. So just wanted to touch that one. And then to the point of the middle ground, there has to actually be an acknowledgement of what happens in between buy. Like, I mean, again, it's you're not selling. I guess that's the real point. There's something in between selling and silence, right? And there's kind of this perception that like I'm either selling or I'm silent. Well, or I would even say selling is a very broad cycle, right? Especially if you think of B2B and things, right? So let's say I'm either, the way that things typically set up in the mind of many folks are, I'm pushing for a sale, I'm closing. Actually, that's the right word. I'm closing or I'm silent. Like that's sort of the way people think about it. But think about a sales process. No sales process starts with the close. Never starts with the close, right? So like step one, step into the earlier part of the sales process and say, what is my consideration messaging? I'm actually not trying to get a sale or pushing to close in that message. I'm actually trying to enter the consideration set. And then moving up further from that, what is my engagement messaging that actually I explicitly know that there's no sale happening here. I explicitly know that there's no consideration happening here because there's no need here, but my product can be relevant in life, right? And that keeps the touch, keeps the distance, right? And the two things that I'll bring up, one is actually a consumer product, but I'll get to that second. The first is, I mean, the whole weekly newsletter thing that everybody does. And I mean, I'm guilty as charged. I have one for Pratibimba.
We talked about starting one literally yesterday.
Right? Like that whole thing is based on, I want to deliver value to you that's not the value that you're paying me for. Why? Because if I keep delivering value to you regularly, you will remember to come to me when you actually need the specific value that you pay me for.
Yeah, I mean, the internet is very much just a huge battle for people's time, right? Where it's like, hey, like, notice me, please. I'm here wearing a bright, colorful shirt.
I'll just say, one of the things you mentioned in kind of the pre-show stuff was the idea of becoming, a repeat purchase is the situation where you are just the default option for somebody when that problem arises. And I think that's interesting from the repeat purchase side, but I think it's also interesting from an acquisition side, right? Like essentially what brand building is and what brand marketing is cementing your product or your brand as the default option for a problem, even when people are out of market for it. And so that's, exactly what you're talking about. Right? That's the newsletter. That's, hey, I want to always be top of mind for people. So they know when X problem comes up, we're the solution, and they see us as understanding them, one of them. I think that's why so many brands do these roundup newsletters. That does one, it gets great engagement. People love it. And we've been able to measure and see that people's perception of us has extended in terms of the breadth of what they look to us for.
You're an authority.
Exactly.
You're an authority now, right? You're an authority on a thing, right? And that's sort of the way you could kind of, there's sort of, I mean, I said three, it's not that it's an exhaustive three, but you could, like, the three come to mind. You could be an authority on a thing so that then when the thing is necessary, people are like, that's the authority on it. I'm going to go, I have this need now and I know where the authority is for it. I'm going to go there and take their help, right? You can give free product away. And by free product, I don't mean your actual product. I mean like another thing that actually is valuable to them that's loosely connected to what you actually sell that you just give away. So like Wayfair 3D Room Planner and all of the AR, VR tools are kind of like this, right? There's nothing, I mean, explicitly happening there, but it's just kind of fun, right? To be able to go in and like put in a room plan and just like drop in a bunch of furniture and see how it looks and all of that stuff. There's no explicit sale happening there, right? And that 3D room planner, a bunch of engineers put in a lot of energy to build it or whatever, right? Like it's not a free thing to build, but you're handing it out and you're just like, here, come play, come have fun, come engage with this experience. That kind of keeps you connected to me in the category. You don't have any home needs right now, that's fine. It keeps you connected to me in the category, right? And then sort of the third way you can do it is the way that I don't really have as much experience in, and I've seen a lot of like failure in this area too from a peripheral side, so I know this is like really hard, but there's the whole like content marketing side of things of like, oh, we're going to do something and like have a blog and then talk about our blog posts, like all that kind of stuff, right? Which if you're going to do that, it needs to be sort of really clear what are you trying to do? It could be a flavor of authority. Like I'm doing that to establish authority in a thing. And that there's a clear purpose behind that. And you're going there, right? But if it's not that, and it's just kind of, we're going to talk about interesting stuff related to our space, what is it actually, right? And that's where then because the bar is really high, right? Like you're going to be fighting for share of voice with the direct response stuff to get that stuff pushed out to your base. So the bar is already pretty high. Like if you don't have a really strong understanding of what you're trying to go build there that you can convince people of inside your organization, you're not going to get enough time to try and figure it out. They're just going to be like, oh, these messages don't work and whatever. Let's go back to direct response.
Well, that last one's really interesting, right? Like, because I agree, the blog, the content marketing, all that. I think it actually maps really well to both 1 and 2. Right, like your blog could be establishing
it could be an
understand all the problems. Yeah. It could be a place where you're giving resources because, hey, our product solves this problem. Here's tools we've made and how-to guides we've made that solve 5 ancillary problems.
Right.
But then number 3, I think, is fascinating, right? And this is something I saw when I was agency side all the time. We'd be onboarding these brands and we'd be like, okay, what are your goals? Tell us about your brand. Like, well, we're a lifestyle brand. Okay, great. Tell me about that lifestyle. And like, how does that come to fruition and come to bear for your users? And the problem with saying I'm a lifestyle brand is then you have to have so many touch points like showing that you are part of that lifestyle and how you fit in. And that just takes a lot of work. And like any good content marketing strategy, whether it's a podcast or a blog or whatever, it's going to take a very long time to cement yourself as that default option and to build that brand. And most quote unquote lifestyle brands don't want to put in the work to do in time for 2 years to build this, cement in that they are part of this world. I think there's a few brands that have done a phenomenal job of that, like Strava, absolutely a lifestyle brand. They get endurance sports, all trails. I think those are some very good options. I think a lot of apparel brands struggle with this because they want to push product and they're so focused on DR, but they want to be a quote unquote lifestyle brand. I think that's
the other thing is they want to expand their market after a while, right? There's a ton, like you think of all of the, like Lululemon, for example, is like they started off as this like yoga, athletic company, and then they just kind of like expanded into large scale athleisure. Like every business wants to grow. And, expanding beyond a target demographic means that like there's always this kind of like push and pull where it's like, who are we, but also who do we want to be, right?
And if you're not that thing yet, don't try to build a content strategy around it yet. That's all. If you're not that's all. Like, it doesn't mean you can't try to go become that thing and have this in-between phase, but get that scale going on DR first. Like, get that scale going on whatever. The failures and the real sad part about this is like, if you have a failure in content marketing, it is so painful and expensive and costly that it almost like turns you off from the idea when it could actually be really good for you in other places. So like, and again, this is a little bit more of an at scale company point, I guess, but like a lot of times, like the concept just gets dismissed for quarters and years at a time. It's like, well, we tried it and it didn't work. And it's really sad because generally the failure mode is either like what you're describing. We started doing a content marketing strategy before we were actually the thing. So it was hard for us to really be convincing and effective about that. Or we just didn't, we built a bridge to nowhere. We built all this content. And again, I'm now speaking very much not as the former employee of Wayfair, but as like an outsider, right? Some of the really cool stuff that they've built, like it's sort of back page, right? Like you have to go into my account and like go a few clicks in and then you see the 3D planning tools and whatever else, right? And it's like, again, okay, we've built an amazing thing, but we're not really talking about it.
Yeah, right? Marketing has to be like marketing and product strategy have to like play a hand in hand role, right? Where it's like, hey, we've built this really, really cool thing, and engineers aren't in charge of getting that. I mean, they're in charge of getting it into the world, but they're not in charge about shouting it to the world. And so making sure that what you're built, like making sure that your marketing team and product team have a hand in what the other is doing, or at least talk to each other. I think that this gets harder as you grow a bigger
Yeah.
a bigger
It's
business.
really tough at scale. Yeah.
I think one other thing where this matters a ton is like customer success and customer support, right? Like you just see tons and tons of customer support and customer success orgs absolutely have nothing to do with the rest of the business besides take calls and like solve customer complaints. But there's a treasure trove of info there that can really target your strategy and sort of tell you what you exactly have to do and how to talk to your customers and what your customers care about. Because I feel like that's kind of the theme of this conversation so far.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of I will not even hesitate in taking sort of responsibility for trying to push this to a mindset conversation because, obviously that's where my head's at, right? But like that is a lot of this, right? Like it's like what consistency in mindset makes a big difference. Why did we build, going back to a couple of things that brings us full circle, we go to CX, like why did we build the content strategy? Because we wanted to be a lifestyle brand. Or like, let's take it, Sean, from your point. Why are we a lifestyle brand? First, okay, we are that thing. Are we that thing? Okay, we are that thing. Got it. We are that thing. If we are that thing, how are we going to talk about that thing? Okay, we want to be an authority on that thing, or we want to actually be a place for enjoyment of that thing. What is it, right? Like linking it all the way through and then bringing it back to what you just said, Ibby, about like, okay, the way to link marketing and product is not at the last minute. It's up front. So it's not at the last minute. I built the feature. I did everything. I did all the UX research. I have all this thing. Now go tell everybody about it. Then marketing's like, no, I'm not going to tell everybody about it. I got to do all this DR marketing. I'm not going to like take share of blame for that. But if you connect it up front, hey, marketing, we're building this thing. This is the UX. Hey, look at the UX. This is why this matters. And marketing can already start to think about like, hey, okay, so then if that's why it matters to these types of people. Let's start building that into our content calendar up front in a targeted way for those types of people. Right. And it just brings the whole thing into like harmony when everybody understands the why behind something. And so customer service, I'm just going to launch into that. But do you want me to launch into that or do you want me to go somewhere else?
Launch into it.
So like on the customer service front, right? Like, first of all, the name is just not true in most of the cases. Let's just address that real fast. It's the department name is very, very like that's an elevated name to give a department, customer service. And it should be that. But a lot of times it's just treated as like, get people out of my hair and make sure we don't get in trouble and make sure people don't say bad things about us.
Yeah. And like, you've talked a bunch about how a metric can, like the ripple effects of picking a metric, right? And I think one of the default metrics for a support team is how fast do you close out a ticket.
And how much it costs.
And how much does it cost?
Yeah.
And if you optimize for those two things, the fastest way is just to close out a ticket with no redemption, with no refund, with no whatever. That's zero cost, and that's as fast as possible. Unless you look at like you were saying with the cost of an unsubscribe, unless you come up with a variable or a constant to say a bad CX experience or customer service experience is going to have this much monetary cost to us.
The way you control costs in customer service is by using customer service to figure out what's going wrong and stop it from happening in the first place. That's how you control customer service costs, not by reducing cost per resolution. That's the role that quote unquote customer service plays in controlling costs in your business. And guess what? If you really think about it like that, you're actually using customer service as a revenue generator, because now the more positive experiences customers have, the more business they're going to do with you, right? I mean, I don't know if I want to, if you guys want me to keep,
No, I think
hammering on
that's
that,
a great.
I think that's a
good place to wrap up.
Okay.
Because otherwise we're going to keep going for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
I
know that's what I want to do.
I know this is definitely better than
great. This is awesome.
I always have to get my kudos out to Klaviyo for this one on the customer service side. They're back in the day, their CS chat was manned by a rotation of the employees. It wasn't like a customer service team. It was like, hey, it's your shift on customer service. And one thing I always loved about that was they weren't worried about how fast am I going to close out this ticket. They were worried about like, how fast am I actually going to resolve? Like, what is the success rate of this resolution? Like, am I actually going to solve Sean's problem when he chats in? And it was always fascinating. It was a great experience. And what you're like, exactly what you're saying, because I always had a good experience when I chatted in all the time, but I never once was like, I'm done with Klaviyo because I'm having to talk to their customer support team. It was always like tight. I actually love and respect Klaviyo so much because they are always there for me. If I can't figure out how to do something, they have an expert. And like, if it's the wrong person on the shift that I get, they will like stop and go find the right person in the right department. And like, that's that's what you're saying, right? Turn customer service from a cost center to a value center.
No, I was going to say Looker used to be this way too. If you've ever used that BI tool, I don't think they are this way anymore, but they used to hire just really, really, really smart, like technical early C, like computer science people that were like kind of data driven out of university. And I remember one time there was this, I'll never forget this. We had like a board meeting the next day at my last company, and we had to like close out the quarter and create all these dashboards and whatever, and something like broke, and somebody stayed online with me from like the hours of like 1 a.m. to like 3 a.m. like just pair programming and pair like building stuff with me, which was it was awesome. This has been great. I've enjoyed this so much. Amit, thank you so much for coming on. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Thanks so much.